Welcome, everybody. My name is Nicolai Parlog. I'm a Java developer advocate at Oracle, and this is...
And my name is Anna Maria Mihalceanu. I'm also a Java developer advocate at Oracle, Nicolai's colleague. And today, we want to give you the opportunity to ask us anything about Java. So anything you have related about Java development, what you're working on, and so on. We're going to try to address those questions in this session. And yes, here is the Slido QR code where you can address questions besides yelling them at us, I think, or somebody with a microphone might get to you. We will repeat those questions. You can use both German and English. Nicolai is going to translate the German questions into English because this is a recorded session, so we want to make sure that in the recording there is also the actual question in English so others can watch and see your question, but also watch our answer and to know to what is connected. Hopefully we're going to do a good job and answer the questions properly.
Okay, so in case you're not sure what exactly you could ask, here are a few starters, but we literally prepared nothing. This is the second to last slide, and the last slide contains the links you already saw on the previous slide. So it's all about you. You have to ask these questions, and if you don't have any, we're just going to get a very early afternoon coffee, I guess. But if you don't have anything to ask about yet, but one of these sound interesting, you can start there, but that's not the program we're going to go through. The idea is that you ask your questions. But if you don't have any, you can go with those. So by the way, and you can also use Slido, which as far as it looks on my mobile Firefox, by the way. I don't see any yet, but I'm sure they will pop up here. If somebody asks a question and we seem to be missing them, just yell, and we'll check Slido again.
So just make sure. We're going to use the mobile phones to check for the...
Yeah, we're going to, so I forgot to open the tab here. Okay. Right, so I already saw a hand here. Sorry, what? That links to what? No, really? Huh, we made that intentional. Okay, so the question was about JDK enhancement proposal 468, which is with expression with records. So for those of you who don't know, the idea behind that is that since the record fields are final, so you cannot reassign them, and you have a record that is almost in the right state, and you just want to change one thing, since you cannot call a setter, it's really annoying to call a constructor and then copy over like 10 fields, although arguably maybe the record is too large, but whatever, cover a bunch of fields and just change the one field. Because that really obstructs what you're actually doing, which is just changing the one thing. And with expressions, propose that you can write something like, you have a record instance, and then you just write with, and then you write an assignment, let's say full name with, and then first name equals Jane instead of John. And then a bunch of things happen behind the scene, and the result is you get a new instance of a record that has all the fields that the old one had, but now what used to be John is now Jane. And the question is, why is that JEP number low like that? We are now in the 500s, and it's still not targeted. The reason for that is that this story of how to deconstruct and put things back together is pretty well figured out for records. But objects at some point also want to join in on the story. They also want to be deconstructed. Not all objects need to be deconstructed, but some objects should be deconstructible. The idea here behind this is, if you use enums and the enum limitations become too limiting, you can turn that into a class, and it still mostly works. Like most of the things still work. And the same should be possible with a record. Like if record limitations ever become too harsh, you should be able to refactor to a regular class without having to start all over, on the use side specifically. And if you can deconstruct and reconstruct records, but not objects, then that falls immediately apart, because presumably we're going to do that a lot with record instances. So objects need to have the same capabilities. But it's unclear what the story looks like there. How exactly can you deconstruct an object? Should there be several deconstructors or just one? And what is the canonical construct of an object to put it back together? That story is not that clear at all. And so instead of doing something now that works for records and then limits the design space for objects, Brian Getz said they first want to figure out how the object story works. And then, we can make the records work. In a conversation with him that I had at Java 1, he pointed out that the JEPs that we see are only like the most figured out parts, and that usually they're already like a couple steps ahead. to see whether everything after that also fits together. And so that JAP just was filed prematurely, basically. Not, oh, I mean, they thought they had figured it out, and then it turns out they didn't. Yes, we have to wait longer for an unspecified amount of time. That's probably the answer to all when will X happen, is probably when it's done, and we don't know when.
So we have questions on Slido, and there's one for security, I think. I assume that the question is, why are EC private keys not destroyable? I hope the person who asked this refers to elliptic curve private keys. I don't understand exactly what you mean destroyable, like decryptable or something that can be like, yeah? Yeah. Okay. So just to repeat a bit, you were asking like why the elliptic curve private keys are not destroyable similar ways to the symmetric keys in the JDK security. Well, I need to ask this question to somebody who knows a little bit more about the implementation before offering a proper answer, but that's a very good question, and I will follow up with a response on social media once I get the response to that. I am not knowing in depth that much the security.
Same. I want to say I just learned that there's an interface called destroyable. I did not know that. So apparently there's an interface called destroyable since Java 4. Objects such as credentials may optionally implement this interface to provide the capability to destroy its contents. It's not deprecated, so that cannot be the answer. So yeah, what Anna said, I think we have to figure that out. We're here for the rest of the conference. We might reach out to somebody who knows while we're still here. So come find us at the Oracle booth sometime tomorrow or maybe Thursday, and maybe we have an answer for you.
So we're keeping this one for now, but we're going to come back to it with a public answer as well. Okay, there's another easy question coming from somebody that we might know. What is your guys' favorite Java version, except for the latest?
EA. Does that count? Yes. You have to pick a different one. Early access is what I picked.
Oh, okay.
Which is not the latest, technically, so.
Yeah, I was going to say that. You took my answer.
Well, I cheated faster. Now your turn.
My turn. I mean, it's tough, given that you're working with everything. Maybe 21 still, but, 25 is coming over.
Maybe we can rephrase the question to what is your favorite, what version, like in the sense of like what the changes that it brought? Okay,
So what is our favorite Java version given the changes brought? That's another difficult one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
so
I'm just gonna say the unpopular one. I'm gonna say 9, which is not true, but I did write a book about it, so I have to say it.
But since we're at this question about Java versions, can we do like that little poll at what Java versions are being used by our audience? So can you please raise your hand if you're using Java 8 in production? You're good with counting, I hope?
I don't know, like I would say like 15 to 20%?
15 to 20%. Okay.
I'm guessing though. So, but that means you can raise your hand several times, right? The way the question was phrased, do you run in production, you can raise your hand several times.
Yeah, because maybe you use more than just one version.
Okay, 9. What? No, wait, this can't be right. 10. Good. Okay, I'm just testing you.
Okay, Java 11.
That's way more, about half maybe?
Yeah.
We skip all the other ones, we go to 17, yes?
Yeah. JDK 17. Woohoo,
That's
nice.
more than half.
So more than half. JDK 21.
Woo.
Wow, impressive. Well done, well done.
Okay, should we ask about 24 though, I guess?
Yeah.
24, anybody? Yes! Oh wow,
Well
that's
done.
way more than I thought. Anybody courageous enough to run 25? Probably not. You shouldn't. In production.
I mean, it's possible if you're doing, canary releases and you're just releasing that to a small portion of your end users. It is possible, to make sure that you're not, damaging all the end users in case something gets out there.
Should we ask 6 and 7 or not?
7. Well
wow,
done.
you're outing yourself.
So we'll have one person with 7 from all.
Okay.
Okay.
But I really appreciate the number of people on 21, and I think most of you who got there observed that, yeah, 8 to 11 was kind of challenging, and maybe 11 to 17 a little bit with a strong encapsulation being turned on by default. But 17 to 21 was really straightforward, and I think it's the same from 21 to 25.
That's the next question.
Oh, the next question is, when will Java get operator overloading? Okay, that's a good question, actually. So I think in the past, the answer would have been, I don't know, probably never, maybe, who knows? But that's not quite the case anymore. So I definitely cannot give you an answer on the timeline, or rather, maybe on an abstract timeline. So once Valhalla has value types, and then we start to create primitive-like types, like unsigned int, or maybe something like a two-dimensional point or whatever. We start constructing those. Then it becomes really unfathomable that we always have to do math, or arithmetic, I should say, with functions. Sorry, with methods, right? Like just big integer style. That's really painful. So there is, at that point, the pain becomes large enough that maybe, yes, there will be enough motivation, enough pressure to find a way to define at least simple operations on these custom types. So from what I've heard, well, from what Brian said, it's definitely not going to be just a free-for-all, like in Scala, where, I don't know, hashtag quotation mark skull does something that you have to look up somewhere. So it's really much more limited. And I think the idea that it was, I hope I remember this correctly, was type classes, I think, in other languages. But that makes no sense that I remember this wrong. But there's basically a way in functional programming languages to define for a class another class that defines algebraic operations, which are often reversible, for example. So it forces you to do a plus then with a minus. And so to have a limited amount of operations that have to follow very strict rules for them to be usable. So we probably won't be able to do list plus for list.add, but something simpler to get the basic arithmetics down is definitely possible now. I don't want to promise that it's going to happen, and it's surely not going to happen soon. I don't think this will happen this decade, I should say. It's 2025, right? So Valhalla being done, I don't know. I don't think it will be GA this decade. Maybe we get a preview, but I don't think so.
Wow, okay.
It sounds terrible, right? For a few more years, I want to say
It
that.
depends who you ask. Actually, I'm sure that if enough content is served to a specific LLM, it can say that it will be out even this year. So
That's true.
if you want a more positive view, you can generate one.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's another question here. Okay, there's one that disappeared. Or I'm trying to use the...
Yeah, but you can also raise your hand if you want to. Oh, people are raising me. Unless we
okay.
know each other, we can chat, and we
Oh,
don't know each other better. We can chat
We
anytime.
don't no, these people we know.
Yeah, in the back there.
In the back.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, does now that we require people to modernize, or we require projects to update, basically to adapt to changes, deprecations, and rules, I think is what you're referring to. Does that happen, or does that just drive people away and they're like, well, if I have to write code anyway, might as well write code in some other language and leave Java behind?
I think that's always coming up to organization, ways of working, and to people. You can drive away from a specific language or a specific framework as long as you feel comfortable that you and your humans that do the implementation are going to be successful with the new journey. So it's always like not, driving away when the when other languages, other cool features appears, but it's also looking at the current skills that your team has and has acquired during time, and if they're really open to leave those behind and adapt to a total new thing, maybe in the ecosystem, to build a new architecture. Rewritings are expensive. Total rewrites are expensive. That's why for a long, long time we strive to build something that is evolvable. And that's what Java is evolving. It's not breaking things. It's just slowly evolving while trying to make sure that it has some backwards compatibility, but leaving behind some of the features that could be potential damaging for applications and warning you that this might not be good for you to be done in the new modern way for applications. So in terms of breaking, rewriting, it's up to each organization. It used to be a case when rewritings were more frequent, at least from my previous experience in the field. Rewritings were more frequent in the 2018 to 2021, 2022. But you really want to revolve and rebuild. But to evolve what you currently have, you actually have to have a good base. So many people need to rewrite if the base was not good. Unfortunate. It's hard to take a decision on not to move forward in terms of architecture, but in terms of totally rebuild with a new language, it's kind of risky. If you already have a great team that delivers with existing skills, you don't want to lose that. It's kind of like contra investment, right?
Yeah, I want to add to that one big contributor to what gets removed in Java is also how often is it used. So yes, the one part is within OpenJDK, is that stuff still useful? Maybe it has an immense maintenance burden, but that's not enough. Some things have a maintenance burden, but they are used everywhere and for good reason, and so they will never be removed. Many things that do get removed is because the equation doesn't work out, because it is a maintenance burden. At the same time, it's not used a whole lot. So for example, finalization or maybe the security manager are things that are still used, but not to a degree where changing code that deals with that is even coming close to a complete rewrite of the application. So yes, applications are now more than in the past expected to change parts of the implementation to upgrade new Java versions. But I think overall that's a tiny percentage of the development work that is going on in that application. Yeah, follow up. Yeah. Yeah. No, but integrity by default does not take away deep reflection. You can deeply reflect over everything you want. You just need to add a command line flag. No, that's important. No, the train is not going there. That's important to understand. Integrity by default does not mean, the important part here is the by default part. Nobody is even conceiving of the idea to take the reflection away from Java. Reflection and deep reflection, even breaking to stuff that you're not supposed to, is something that has made Java viable and will keep Java viable in certain fields or just at the edge of what's possible, and that will remain possible forever. All that by default means the maintainer of an application has to opt in. They have to say, if you deeply reflect over Java base or over the dependency, you might change their behavior. You might open up an attack vector maybe. If you have an agent that just changes bytecode as it's being loaded, you're changing the behavior of the platform. If you're willing to accept that as the person who's running the application, that's all good, and you can keep doing that. There are some, I see what you're getting though, there are some paths where something on the way of being there to the part of being taken, being entirely gone, in between it's locked behind command line flags. And some of the integrity by default stuff might seem the same way, but most of it isn't. So dynamic agents who will be disallowed by default at some point, they will always be allowed, just you have a command line flag at launch and say, I will allow dynamic agent later. Deep reflection is the same thing. What goes away is, for example, unsaves memory methods, but they are replaced by the foreign function memory API. So don't worry, these things are not taken away forever, it's just the maintainer of an application has to opt in knowing that this is a maintenance trade-off, or let's say integrity trade-off, and whatever happens when you lose a bit of integrity is different things, right? Maintainability could suffer, security or performance could suffer. That depends on what exactly is going on.
Okay.
We had another question back there though earlier.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the question is, why isn't there a better reflection API implementation? I think that would be summarized.
But that the specific example that you gave would mean that the compiler needs to know what class you're reflecting over and what methods it has before time, before you write the code or while you write your code. But at that point, if you know the class you're reflecting over and you know what methods it has at compile time, just call the class. Then you don't need. Ah. Okay, so so he's proposing annotation processing. I want to guess that I'm not sure the ideas that you have are entirely viable, but maybe they are. What we could do is we could talk about that later in detail, and maybe you have a few ideas. And some of these APIs clearly, get improvements all the time. So if you have something there that you feel like, hey, that would make sense, that would be a coherent and more usable API, and there is something there actually, then OpenJDK is there, the mailing lists are there, taking that to the core libs mailing list, for example, like, hey, I have these use cases, these challenges, and I realized that this, for example, could solve this. That's always something you can do. Always important when you go to the JDK mailing list, I would always recommend start with the problem you have, describe that in all detail, and the things you try to solve it. Those are more important than I have an API here that does something. Because without those other two, the API is kind of like left hanging in the air. But yeah, it's not inconceivable that those APIs can do with some improvement, yeah. And what would be nice in Java, but it just doesn't allow it, is if like, hey, this class, this instance has these 5 methods, I'll just cast it to an interface that has these 5 methods, and then I can just call it directly. Java will say, because it's not structurally typed, it's nominally typed, it will say, no, this instance does not implement that interface. And the fact that those have the same methods do not concern me. That's basically duck typing, right? So that's not a thing in Java. But maybe it could be a thing for the reflection API. I don't know. Let's talk, and then maybe you just propose this.
Do we want to get another one from here, just
Sure,
to mix?
yeah.
So, why we don't want to fix bugs because of backwards compatibility. If Java behaves wrong, shouldn't we fix it rather than thinking someone is relying on this bug? So, usually when there are bugs, and speaking from the security point of view, when there are issues with security, they are backwards ported. I've seen this happening oftentimes. Also with security features, by the way, there are some security features that are also backported. They've like smaller features that are there and they're backported because they are important. But especially when it comes to bug fixing bugs because of backwards compatibility, and if Java behaves wrong, this is quite broad with Java behaves wrong.
I think the idea is that there is like the Excel bug who thinks 1900 is a leap year when it isn't. And the reason why it was known at, so 1900, wait, which way around is it? Help me out here. 1900 should be a leap year because it's divided by 4, but it should not be because it's also divided by 100. But Excel thinks it is one, right? And the reason why it does that is because it was re-implementing like Lotus, I think, where it existed before and had that bug. So it used to be a bug, and Excel re-implemented it intentionally, be like, well, it's wrong. Everybody relies on it, so what can we do? So I'm not sure how many things of those do exist in Java. I want to recommend to those who think they do exist. I think this only can be discussed on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. And maybe there are certain things that are, because I think wrong is a very strong word. Like, it's actually wrong, I would guess it would get fixed. But if it's just, surprising, then maybe it doesn't get fixed because, yeah, if enough code depends on it, that comes back to what we said earlier. Java's trying not to break stuff just because. If there's a lot of code depending on something that is just awkward but not clearly wrong, then maybe it's better to let it live. But yeah, bring a specific example, not here now though. But yeah, and then let's discuss on a specific example why this happens.
Okay, there's an interesting one. I'm going to skip one and go to this one. Why is Project Loom started available so fast? Because usually it takes 5 versions to make feature production ready, but for Loom it took 2 versions. I think this is quite broad set in terms of Loom. I think you refer to like virtual threads maybe that had a shorter life cycle. So probably you've seen that the JEPs and the enhancement proposals, some of them get 1 round of preview and then they get finalized. Some others get more round of previews and they get finalized. That is based on the feedback received from you that you're going to try the early access builds or the actual builds. And you say, hey, this doesn't work for my situation. You go to the mailing list, you say, this doesn't work for me, and usually these things are refined. So when there's more feedback received, active feedback, these implementations can be reworked, and if it's not a lot of work, that's also important. But all these implementations are done by humans, so it's kind of impossible to foresee all the possible use cases for all the JDK enhancement proposals. So this is why certain features get out faster and get finalized faster. compared to other features that take a longer time to incubate, get a longer time in preview because they get feedback continuously. And sometimes when a round of preview happens, maybe there's a change in the API, the new change affects other people, and there's more conversation. Java really wants to encompass changes that help a broad majority. And yes, sometimes that takes longer. In case of Loom, in case of virtual threads, for example, it took less time than in other cases. But for example, for structured concurrency, we're now in fifth preview.
So for JDK 25, it's the fifth. Yeah.
For JDK 25, this is the fifth preview. And yeah, we don't know when it's going to be finalized. That's because there are still conversations going on about the API, about other use cases, and yeah, why ship something fast and break somebody's code base when you can just think properly with regards its adoption? And I think nobody's being stopped to adopt a feature before it's being final. I mean, for example, for foreign function and memory API, there was Lucene, there was NetU adopting this API, long becoming final in 22. So.
Yeah. I want to add to that depends on, I think, how much of the feature is publicly available, right? How much of that is surface that we're dealing with. If you're talking about a language feature or an API, then it's basically mostly surface, right? Like the question is, how do you interact with structured concurrency? What do the classes and the methods look like? That's a very important part in structured concurrency. But then you have stuff like maybe complex object headers or virtual threads, which are mainly within the runtime. So you don't have a lot of API, and that means that things in the runtime that are internal already can, of course, more freely be evolved and refactored. So let's say virtual threads are ready, and we know that they pin on synchronized blocks, which was an issue in the past before it got fixed. Then you can ship virtual threads as they are, and under the hood, fix this problem down the line, because fixing this problem will not change what the feature looks like on the outside, because there's a very tiny surface at the top. But if you know structured concurrency is an API that you want people to use, then a lot of that is surface, and you know there's an issue with the surface, then you cannot change that later, because then if it's standardized, it's already unchangeable, basically. So features that are closer to the VM, I think there is less chance that things pop up that you have to do that would be a breaking change in the future. And if everything that can come down the line is just an implementation detail, then the feature can be shipped, like virtual threads. All those people who don't care about pinning on synchronized blocks could already use virtual threads, and the people who do care, they had to wait a few releases longer. Whereas with structured concurrency, it has to be right the first time it's standardized, because there is no changing around later. So I guess maybe that's like a little bit of an explanation why it happens there. But yeah, as Anna said, a lot of that is also just the amount of feedback, the amount of possible change that can go into it. And also just in OpenJDK, like it's a resource problem to a degree, right? Like you all develop software, you all know, ideally everybody works on everything all the time and everything gets done by the deadlines, but realistically speaking, only a limited amount of people can work on certain things, and sometimes things just take a little longer.
And there's a follow-up on the virtual threads. Why virtual threads weren't implemented with synchronized keyword? I know that its implementation is a mess, but Loom without it has a very limited use case.
I do not understand this question.
You really want to read it again?
Why virtual threads weren't implemented with synchronized keyword? Like, I just don't know what that means.
Weren't implemented with the synchronized keyword.
Yeah, but I don't know. So if you're here, maybe you can either refine it here loudly. Yes?
Yeah.
Also, why virtual threads why they pinned originally? Maybe? Okay, so to that, virtual threads. Okay, so who here knows about virtual threads? Who here knows what pinning is? Oh, that's a few people. Okay, for the rest, let's explain before we go too far off on a tangent. A virtual thread is like virtual memory. You have infinitely much of that until you use all of it, then it's gonna turn out it's not actually that infinite. As virtual memory is mapped to actual memory, virtual threads are mapped to actual threads. And the trick behind virtual threads is whenever a virtual thread waits, it does not actually require a real thread, which is a scarce resource, to also wait. The virtual thread can just wait on its own in memory, and it blocks nothing important except a little bit of memory and whatever the call stack is there and whatever data that references. But the actual thread, the operating system thread that runs that virtual thread, can go elsewhere and do something else. Unless there is pinning. Pinning happens under certain circumstances, and that means that the virtual thread and the operating system thread are now pinned, and when the virtual thread wants to wait, so does the operating system thread. And suddenly this whole mirage of there being infinitely many virtual threads collapses to If all of those get pinned, which would be a extreme case, but just for the sake of argument, suddenly you can have exactly as many virtual threads as you could have operating system threads before. So the whole illusion disappears. And the reason why that's the case is just because the implementation of synchronization is a code that is, as you can imagine, under a lot of stress, right? It needs to get things right to uphold the Java memory model. It needs to be as fast as possible, and all of that across different operating systems and across different hardware instruction sets. So it's not exactly, a 5-liner implementation, I would guess. Even not that I've looked at it, but that would surprise me. And so it was just the fact of the matter that the way synchronize was implemented is that it would pin. It would pin a virtual thread to a platform thread. And that was known when virtual threads were released. It was a known limitation, and was decided because that would take like a year or two to undo. Let's ship virtual threads with this issue, so everybody, as I said earlier, who doesn't care about it can use them, and everybody else has to wait. So basically what this meant is a bunch of projects could use virtual threads 2 years before they otherwise could have, because they didn't care about this issue. And because it is fixed in 23 or 24? 23, right? 24? 24, yeah, I think 24, yes. It's fixed in 24. So all of you who go to 25 straight, it doesn't matter. It will be fixed on 25 when you get there.
Take the latest EAs and it's
Exactly.
Okay, there's another one that is interesting. How to start contributing to JVM, I assume to Java. Why cannot we simply submit PRs to OpenJDK for small changes, but rather use mailing lists and find a willing contributor?
So that's like just project governance. So first of all, if you contribute source code, you have to guarantee that it's your right. So first of all, you have to agree that the rights give all through the project as far as that works, so they can have the open source license and whatever. And then you need to also verify that you can actually in the position to hand over those rights, because if you're doing this on your employer's time, you might have a contract with your employer that says whatever code you write is actually our code, and then suddenly you cannot even hand over your code to OpenJDK even if you wanted to. And so that definitely needs to be figured out. Otherwise, OpenJDK becomes a legal impossibility that collapses on its own weight. So you need governance. That's why you can't just do drive-by edits. That's one reason why you can't just do drive-by edits on OpenJDK.
Well, I also thought that I could bypass this kind of process, since I'm employed by Oracle. Why not?
Nope.
But I still went through the process. And to your question, like small changes, I mean, if you get to the mailing list with a small change, probably it's not that small and might actually have a lot of impact. And it's not about necessarily finding a willing contributor, but actually to explain why your contribution makes sense, why is it relevant, and actually to document it properly that it will not, have like bad consequences. Yeah. Oftentimes, when we submit fixes as developers for something, we kind of tend to see only certain paths, but when we get understanding from other people and get reviews and discuss things on the mailing list, it's better because you get more opinions, more point of views, and I know it's tiring because you get then more, more technical discussions, and they might not agree with you, and that's annoying, right? But on the other hand, it's the impact of your change will impact 10 million developers, so...
And billions of devices, as I read occasionally.
Yes, according to the 3, statistics. So
5?
It's not that small, and it's a big contribution. And if you get to contribute to Java, it's a big change, regardless how small in terms of lines of code it is. So congratulations for putting up with the process. It is an effort, even for that small code change, and we really appreciate that for taking the time. But nobody's bypassing that process.
Yeah, I think the best way to get started, if you see something that you feel needs to be changed, is go to the respective mailing list and say, I've seen this. Is there an issue for that? Or maybe search the bug database yourself and say, I saw this issue is there. What can I do to work towards fixing it? Don't come with the code. Come with the offer to work on that. Some things are just tied up in many internal considerations that may not be immediately obvious from the outside, that just might make it, even though it could technically be a small code change, that might make it infeasible as a beginner thing. Just as I said earlier also, when I said if you have an idea for an API, it's always better to get to OpenJDK with them. Hey, I'm here, I have interest in this, or I have an opinion on that. I have real life data to give you, or I'm willing to help fix this one issue because it concerns our company. That's always better than to start with code. Start with this openness and then see where the main discussion takes you. And yeah, sometimes people in OpenJDK are busy and not all messages get picked up. That's why Oracle has a DevRel team, and those poor suckers can be poked on social media and elsewhere. And you can just tell them like, hey, I wrote this email to OpenJDK offering my help, and they didn't respond. And then those guys maybe have to be like internally like, look, there's this email, could you please? Right, that's what DevRel does. It works both ways. So go to OpenJDK and offer your help. And if that doesn't work, poke us, and maybe we can help speed the process along.
Yeah.
So it doesn't help if Chuck Norris asks, or?
No. Chuck Norris, of course, yes. Chuck Norris gets to like commit to main
It's
immediately.
priority, okay. Priority based on being famous.
So, but what Anna said, right? We're like Oracle and OpenJDK is not the same thing, right? Like actually, far from it. So I'm not an OpenJDK member. So that's why I try to not say we when something gets developed, because we don't. They do. I just talk about it. So OpenJDK is a separate institution that runs on it by its own rules. And yes, most of those people happen to work for some companies, and many for one company, and well, most of them work for a company, and many of those work for Oracle. But OpenJDK is a collection of individuals that is governed by its own rules, and just because you work for Oracle doesn't mean you get any special rights there. Just, you know, if you get hired to work on OpenJDK, somebody is probably going to be interested in pushing you through the process, but you still need to do the process, and I didn't, and I'm not a member of OpenJDK. I can't do except complain about it and read JABs.
Yeah, that's what we do in our right, read JABs and complain. Well, there's another connection to this contribution. Maybe we could migrate from the ancient mailing list to a Discord or some more modern communication platform.
So before we managed from the ancient mailing list to Discord, how many migrations did we do in between before we arrived at Discord? Maybe we've lived on Twitter a while in between. I don't know. I get your point. Those mailing lists are terrible, and terrible.
It's tough.
They look terrible. And they're really badly search indexed. It's like sometimes I fail to find something even though I know it's on some of those emails. So they have a lot of downsides, and I wish those things would be updated. But I think the concept of mailing lists, I think, is pretty decent. I think just this specific implementation maybe could see a glow up to get it out of the 90s.
Okay, I need to put this one.
Maybe we have another question here somewhere. Okay,
Okay.
Andres, you raised your hand a couple times.
What is the current state of Java modules? Adoption, tooling, anything that you
Well, you're asking me. Kristen is sitting right across in front of you.
Us.
So the question is, what's the current adoption of modules looking like in the wild, I guess is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Not good, is it? I don't know. It's hard, I don't see, the problem with this is modules is something that you can measure on the library side to a degree, and there are a bunch of, how many thousands? Over 7,000 libraries at the moment, like individual projects on Mavenship as modules. But the real point where modules really make sense is within applications, right? And most of those are not open source. So we're very little insight into what companies out there actually do. Personally, as somebody who thinks modules are a really good idea, I want to say it's probably less than I would want people to use them. But also, it's not the end of the world. Like within OpenJDK, they fulfill a very important purpose, and they are definitely the introduction is actually worth it. Definitely worth it for OpenJDK itself. And I think they could have a much larger share of what's out there. But yeah, I don't know. I cannot give you a number, and you know that. But I would, if it's above 10%, I would be extremely surprised. Very, very surprised.
Do you have additional tokens for adoption and tooling so that people can get more information about it?
Where can people get more information about modules? I mean, we describe modules on dev.java. I think the basics are not even that complicated in real life. They tend to grade sometimes against certain practices. I think for new projects, it's actually, I would recommend to everybody when you start a new project, to start as modules. I think that will be surprisingly doable. The thing is, it will require a constant amount of little bit of work, and the times it saves you will not be obvious. It will never send you a bill that says, you invested 5 hours a week overall of this project into modules, and we saved you 100 hours of a dependency issue somewhere. So you're never going to see that part of it. It will just happen, and that would be good for you. And then you can always really easily get out. If the fun thing about modules is, if you streams everywhere and then you realize, oh my god, this was a mistake, I have to do for loops after all, then that's a lot of work. If you use modules everywhere and then you realize I have to get out, you just write a clever Linux terminal command that probably also works on Unix. But anyway, you write a clever command that just finds all the module info Java files and yeets them, and now you don't have modules anymore. And all the structure that you put in place is still there, so you still get a little bit of a residual benefit. But this feature is not gonna hold you back. So if all the bad things you heard about modules actually happen in your project, you can get out easily. But I think that for many projects, if you specifically use them early on, this is not actually gonna happen. Like many things are much more feasible, I feel, than they're made out to be. But I've been saying that for a couple of years and not convincing too many people, so maybe I'm wrong.
No, you should put back that slide with
The slide with the book?
The
Oh
book
yeah, the
there.
slide with the book, there we go. No, see, I removed it. I shouldn't have.
Damn it. Yeah, I told him to remove the slide with his
Oh, was that what
modules
you're asking?
book.
Should have been. Oh yeah, I wrote a book about modules. Maybe that's what Andres was aiming at. Go get Manning's The Java Module System. That's a very good book.
Yeah, I read it. It's a really good book. So there's a very highly voted question here, and we would like to at least give some hints to this. Will Java ever get proper generics without type erasure? So there's been a question about, generics reification, I think. And this was discussed at JVMLS last year by Remy Forax and his colleague, I don't recall the name. Sorry about that. To approach a new rebuilding, let's say, generics. And there's this trial happening a bit in terms of, let's say, exploratory trial with Project Valhalla and maybe touching on generics. But unpromising, will ever, I don't know, cannot answer for that. But there's still some work being done in this direction. And Nicolai is
Yes,
searching.
I'm looking for, yes, this is the article I'm searching for. Let me see whether I can get out of that full screen mode
Okay.
to push it over. The magic full screen that
Yeah,
I don't
you've
know how to
done-
undo. Okay.
You need to move it over there.
I'm sweating now. Let's see. Can make this work? Yes. There we go. Okay, read this article.
That's what.
So, it turns out erasure happens on a lot of different levels, and the generics erasure is sometimes annoying. I'm aware, and there are some very few nifty things that are hard to do with erasure. But overall, it's not at all as bad as it's made out to be. And reified generics have their own downside. I'm not sure whether it's linked from here, but there's also a white paper by John Rose. I think it's called Parametric VM, which describes how all this information could be reified in the VM. That is, I would say, personally, I found it not a fun read at all because I had to quit after 2 pages because John Rose is too clever for me. It's a lot of internal machinations of the VM. For Valhalla, there might be it turns out your runtime doesn't care whether it's a list of string or a list of integer. It's the same. It doesn't matter. To you maybe, but to the runtime it doesn't matter. So lugging all this information around comes with a cost. Is it really worth it? That's up for debate. For the runtime, it's really important though if it's a list of int instead of integer, because then it might want to use an int array instead of an array of references. So at that point, it really becomes important. And so for Valhalla if once Valhalla does specialized generics, where an array list of int or integer bang or whatever it will be is actually backed not by an object array but by an int array. For that to ever be possible, some generic information has to make their way into the bytecode, into the behavior of the VM. So that's why this is currently being brought up and discussed, just because it needs to happen, at least in some limited form. This is extremely unlikely to, from my point of view, that's my personal opinion. I think it's unlikely that retrofits for other types, because I don't think that's important enough or even maybe possible, I don't know. But yeah, so there's some movement in that space, but I don't think that the full rigmarole of, yes, at runtime, I know that, for example, C# has much more information there, and then C++ uses the actual templating. That also means, by the way, if you ever cast a list of one generic type to a list of another generic type, that will become impossible, right, with reified generic. Now, these are different types, and they can never be the same. I'm not sure that's going to make that's going to make some code definitely worse. There's definitely platform code or framework code out there that really heavily relies on erasure, actually. So, yeah, I think this article goes into more detail.
The person who asked this question, if they are interested in getting the link of this article and also the other one to John Rowe's paper, maybe Nicolai can share that after the session with
or
the
just
person.
this one, just Google Brian Getz erasure, and then what was it, love, I think I typed? No, but we got the things we have. Oh, how I turned to stop worrying and love erasure. Yeah, so I just type Brian Getz love erasure, and then you get this article.
Yeah, so that you get this.
Although the search results are super frustrating because it just says.
I'm like really debating if taking one last question, but it has like high rating, and we have
Go,
a short answer.
Yeah, we're
for
over
this
time
one.
anyway. Let's do that. He's just one, and we're two people.
Okay, in C#, there is an ability to generate
go.
getters and setters automatically. For Java, I have to include Lombok. Will Lombok be a part of Java? No.
There we go.
Folks, we have records in Java. Why do you feel the need to have this done by Lombok with these new awesome features that are available for us?
Generating, like having getters and setters on classes is it's a pathology in its own that we can discuss at some other point. Right, so yes, I want to show you one more slide, which I'm really failing at right now, which is this one. So if you're interested in all this, first of all, you can follow us on social media. Well, I linked to Twitter on there just because I didn't get around to updating those slides, but I'm not there anymore. But you can find me indepafx.dev on my website. You can find Anna Maria on, I think, all the social media sites.
Yeah, I'm
Blue
the
Sky
same
and Mastodon.
handler on Mastodon, on Blue Sky, and everything.
Yeah.
You're not the same handler also on Blue Sky?
Yeah, it's also
So
indepafx.
we're all on social media platforms. I mean, Nicolai is not on LinkedIn. I am there. But so if you have a question on
What, LinkedIn?
on
Crazy.
you can also reach out on LinkedIn as well.
And then there's
And
websites, Dev Java, Learn Java, Insight.java that you can check out, the Java YouTube channel where you can hear us and also more qualified colleagues talking about all kinds of stuff. And then openjdk.org, of course, if you want to do something. Thank you very much for your attention. If we didn't get around to answering all your questions, find us at the booth and have a great JCON.
Yep.
See you.
Enjoy.